specifically about how GFI has leveraged our AMS offering and solution to be able to augment their team and specifically support their team supporting OBI-EE. So from an agenda perspective, we'll talk about how, and Marco will talk about how they came upon the decision of needing to look for an outsourcer and an AMS solution, the process that they went through in making a decision as to what the team would look like and what the support structure would look like, the timeline that it went over of implementing the actual AMS solution, and then the type of services we're actually using, so specifically from OBIE support to Chemly management. And then lastly, one of the items that we want to talk about is some of the typical myths, debunking some of these AMS myths that we've heard as we've been going out and selling and architecting the solution for other customers, and some of the rebuttals and how we've been able to address and mitigate some of the risks. Next slide, Keith, please. So, Marco, I'll turn slide 7 over to you. I think everyone's very interested in hearing you talk more than me, but we want to talk specifically about the solution for you at GFI, please.
Sure. Hello to everybody. As Bijou and Keith said, my name is Marco Marino. I'm with GFI Group. So regarding AMS and GFI, historically speaking, GFI has outsourced very little. We've had our own data centers, hosting our own technology, our own internal resources, managing, supporting, developing those technologies. Back in 2012, we wanted to change our strategy a bit and implement a global analytical and reporting infrastructure, right? After looking at various, business intelligence tools, we selected OBIE and we implemented it. Once we implemented it and during the implementation, we struggled because, where we felt our internal resources were going to be able to pick up and run with the technology, we saw that that wasn't the case. Their skill set in new technology was, you could say, stale or just non-existent. And to send them out to training would hurt us because who would backfill those positions and those resources when they're out, in classrooms or, practicing this new technology. So we did implement it for our front office risk assessment, some of our executive reporting, MDM solutions, etc. And again, we struggled because, in all honesty, the global support footprint was myself, as well as one other person in EMEA, Europe. So, when we weren't around, and the business, encountered an outage, it was very difficult to bring the business back online with just 2 resources being able to do that role. The other things that kind of inhibited us were, the inability to get timely responses to the business. When they wanted something developed or, built in the solution, it was very difficult to juggle between 2 resources, right? And that's, in all honesty, no matter if you're talking about reporting, ERP, training platforms, the system is only good as the support that it gets or it has. Yeah. So expanding on that, what we were looking for at that time was, how do we enrich the support to give the users a better framework, experience, and overall satisfaction with the solution? With what we looked at, building internal teams, we saw that as being costly. We tried to hire resources, and some were, in the resume looking, like it would basically meet our demands. They fell short in most cases. And then it's a challenge to keep or retain talent, right, in these days. Constant, other companies trying to obtain the talent that exists, or people or resources, changes in their actual personal life, moving, et cetera, just makes it a difficult experience, right, and costly. So that's where we kind of looked at other solutions, and that's where AMS kind of came into play. So I'm sorry, I didn't even look at the slides. I'm just constantly talking as always. Uh, so that's where,
No worries, no worries.
That's where we started looking externally. And, to be honest, AMS was always something that GFI wanted to pursue. Again, because of economy of scales, the vast experience of the resources. And I typically give the analogy of, in an internal resource works at a company for 10 years, the experience that resource has is only things that they were exposed to for those 10 years with that single company. Single installation, single landscape, et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully you get the picture. When you look at external ASM hosting resources, you're talking about individuals that in 10 years have probably experienced, I don't know, over 100 different client configurations, technology, outages, experiences, you name it, they've had it occur. So they can quickly adapt and respond to things that they're faced with. Yeah, kind of think of, if you're as old as I am, MacGyver series back in the day. They can quickly see the problem before others internally would still struggle with analyzing, why is this happening? Where is the problem? Where do I need to look? Is it my responsibility, right? The external resources knows, oh yeah, this is not a big deal. It's not a high risk. We can do X, Y, and Z for the short term to recover, and then A, B, and C later on for a long-term resolution. Okay. Keep going. Let me look at the slides. I'm not known to follow or reorganize, so go ahead.
Well, and I think, Marco, yeah, so for the slide that we're on, and exactly as you were talking about, so as you were looking to build the support organization specifically around OBIEE, one of the things that we always advise clients, and that we did with you, is taking a look at the different stakeholders and different roles and responsibilities that are in play, specifically around your particular situation, which was around OBIEE. So there's your client IT team, there's the client IT team, your team, there's the business team, super users of the system, and then there's the AMS team, which will ultimately support both. And so as we talk to our clients about AMS and putting in the proper structure for them, as you were mentioning, we try to outline the roles and responsibilities in the different stakeholder groups that are in play, and making sure that we understand exactly what's expected of each group. Can you talk a little bit more about how we did that and how we did that with you?
Sure, because we went in with the understanding that it was a one-size-fits-all, and it's not. As you educated us in, it depends on how we want to have it, and it could be a day 1, day 2, day 3 situation, right? The way we chose it, as we wanted Core to be an extension of our team, right? Us still have a hand in kind of playing different roles through the support structure, but have Core be the kind of leading us in it and providing the the subject matter experts in different areas. Has that changed? No, but Core does a good job of, when we meet weekly and semi-monthly at different on different agendas, we discuss, has it been working? What changes could we potentially see in the near and long-term future? And that just helps us understand that we're not just backed into a corner with this with the strategic partner that we have for ASM. Anything to add, Bijou?
No, that's perfect. I think that's perfect. And so, in addition to, Keith, go ahead and go to the next slide. So as we structure these solutions for our customers, and as Marco said, this is not one size fits all, and they're very situational specific. So based on the skill sets, the requirements, the skill sets that our client has available, and frankly, the timeline and budget. These are all solutions that are very situational specific and that need to be architected. So along the lines, in addition to architecting the team and the roles and responsibilities, there's obviously a time frame in which this solution needs to be implemented. And as we have here on the slide about building a seamless support structure, we typically look at implementing an AMS solution in a structure in 3 different phases. There's a transition or an onboarding, if you will, phase where we're putting the support structure in place, our support mechanism, learning our client's environment, gathering all the documentation. That typically happens, and we'll get into some more detail in the next slide. There's but that happens in our transition or onboarding phase, if you will. There's a support stabilization phase that, depending on, again, very situational specific, where you are in and what specific functionality that we're supporting. Is this new functionality that has never been implemented before, that when we take over support, there'll be a stabilization period that then will move into an execution period where support will not be quite as heavy, or the needs may not be quite as heavy, or the changes might change. So again, from the specific deployment or from a support stabilization perspective, maybe the support stabilization phase is not needed because this is functionality that's been used for years, and we're really just putting in a safety net. So again, the support stabilization can be right-sized and customized based on the specific functionality, modules, team that's in place. And then the last phase is support execution. So as we get into steady state support, as we've put in all the plumbing for our support mechanism between logging tickets, having these weekly meetings, as Marco mentioned, we'll have a regular cadence of communication planning, and execution. That's when we get into support execution, which is more of the steady state of the support team. Keith, next slide, please.
And just one thing to add. When we were going through this process at GFI with Core, the one thing that we feared was disruption, right? That our users will feel like they're not going to somebody internally, they're going externally, or there's going to be, an interruption to their, day-to-day utilization of the technology, and that didn't occur. So I think that's very important to keep in mind, is keeping the user feeling like nothing has changed. And the way that was done was, the way that was done with us is we do a very good job with our technology and development and support, but the one thing that we lack is documentation. So I think what Core really did a standout job with is, kind of through interviews, demonstrations, and then reverse engineering, they kind of built out what documentation we should have had on our environments, our customizations, configurations. It kind of gave us a baseline. If you know the old Oracle VR100s and MD50s, et cetera, they gave us a baseline so that we have a takeaway. Right now we have a library that somebody can look at very quickly and understand, how our infrastructure sits for OBIE. So I just wanted to point that out as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for that, Marco. So next slide, Keith, where we talk about, so during the transition phase, and this is more for an example sake, this is, again, all of the timeline for our transition and the resources and the amount of time involved during transition is very situational specific, but we wanted to give you, during this webinar, we wanted to give an example of other solutions that we've put together, and this was an example from a solution that we put together for a customer that was just recently going live on EBS, where what we had determined and architected with the customer was that there was going to be an AMS lead that was on-site 100% of the time during the length of the transition. And again, that was just like Marco said, getting documentation in place, getting our support mechanisms in place between systems, between the customer's help desk and ticketing system, getting that interfaced and integrated in with Core's ticketing system, and getting the mechanism and the mechanics in place for having a seamless support structure. So this particular situation, recall, we architected a solution where there was an on-site AMS lead and an additional development lead because this customer had significant customizations that they were putting forth when they deployed. But what we architected with them as well, it was significant and needed to be understood. It didn't require a full-time development lead on site. And so again, what we want to do and what we're trying to communicate here is as we're building the team And as we're building the timeline through each one of these phases to transition into AMS, we want to be very clear with what the roles, responsibilities, and involvement will be from the different stakeholder groups, and where that specifically may be, whether it's on-site, onshore, nearshore, or offshore. Next slide, please, Keith. So just some more details about transition, what's involved during our transition phase. I think Marco touched on this already, where we're gathering any and all available inventory of documentation, putting that inventory of documentation together, and frankly, where there might be some holes, we can color in those gaps of documentation as well, just to make sure that we're all starting from a steady state perspective. We can start at the planning on initiating the actual transition itself of, again, putting the systems and the ticketing systems in place. We'll have starting to learn the business processes and meeting with the different stakeholder groups of how they're using the system, and specifically if the implementation has been around for a while, we can get into understanding business processes and any particular pain points that are already present. So that's from a learn and capture perspective. From a transition and deploy perspective, obviously we want to establish connectivity, make sure that our AMS team has the ability to log into lower environments, test environments, a QA environment. We'll spend some time, if needed, we can spend some time shadowing client resources, making sure that we understand the process, that we understand the transactions and what's going on from a specific perspective, from a client-specific perspective. We want to ramp up. If there's an onshore, nearshore, offshore component, we want to ramp up those teams, and we want to define any operating procedures that are going to be in place for the specific AMS support. And then from an actual support perspective, we have significant monitors that we put in place, scripts that we put in place to be able to catch specific transactions that are going to be problem transactions further on. We can implement our proactive monitoring to make sure that we catch those ahead of time. We're going to start the process of the actual periodic reviews of the communication planning that we talked about earlier. We can also, if during the transition plan we've assessed that some additional training is required, then what we can do is we'll actually assess that, and we can actually deliver that as part of the transition phase as well. And then obviously from an AMS perspective, and we'll talk about this in subsequent slides as well, AMS is all driven based on, it's very heavily driven off of SLA service level agreements that we want to put in place to make sure that from a measure perspective, from a customer sat and from an execution perspective, we have metrics in place that we can measure against to make sure that our service levels are meeting our customers' expectations. Keith, next slide, please. So I think we talked about support stabilization as well. So again, very situational specific. We've had customers that goes directly from transition into support execution, but depending on this, again, specific environment and what's going on, either from where you are from where our customers are from a deployment perspective, there might be a support stabilization. And again, the example that we're using here is an example that we put together for a customer that was just recently going live and just deploying the EBS applications and technology, the Oracle technology. And so we worked with our customer to architect this solution where we went from a transition phase to a support stabilization phase where we still had an AMS lead on site, but now there was another AMS subject matter expert that was going to be offshore after the transition period. And then we also had a tech lead that was going to be moving offshore. So we transitioned from having an on-site AMS tech lead to an offshore AMS tech lead after the transition period, just to be able to get us through this stabilization hypercare period. Keith, next slide, please. And then lastly, the last phase after support stabilization, obviously, is support execution. And again, this is another example from that same customer of the same solution that we had architected, is from once we got into the execution phase, and for this particular customer, support execution started in month 6. What does that team look like from, again, the different stakeholders, the locations where they're going to be, and what their involvement is going to be. Again, this was more from communication planning and communication execution of setting expectations of the resources involved, their location, and the amount of time. Marco, do you want to talk a little bit about how, from a support execution perspective, where we are with you guys and just how that's been working?
Yeah, for the support execution, we're still on the tail end of, not transition, but, we're sharing that role for OBIE. So we still get internal support tickets, and we also have external support tickets. But that's managed with the kind of the partnership between the project lead on the ASM side as well as internally. But things have now, things that we normally would have to, I hate to say, worry about with our resources, that's being quickly taken care of and resolved by the ASM team. Versus, if they had to be onshore or nearshore, they're definitely taking care of the problem items that are occurring that we would struggle before because of the experience and knowledge of this technology.
Perfect. Thank you. Keith, can we go to the next slide? So we'll talk a little bit about the service request, and this is the core service request fulfillment process as it pertains to our AMS solution. So the example that we'd shown before specifically had an AMS lead on site. That, again, situational specific. That can be the case, doesn't necessarily always have to be the case. For many customers, we don't have an on-site AMS lead, and the AMS fulfillment process the service request fulfillment process begins with an SR being created, whether that be in the client's help desk and ticketing system that gets interfaced and integrated into Core's system, or whether you go directly into our ticketing portal to be able to create an SR or go through our help desk number. An SR is the beginning point of actually requesting support from Core. Now, our model, and we'll talk about our resourcing model, but we have an assigned resource model where there's a primary lead for every customer. So there isn't just a pool of resources, but there's an assigned lead for every customer. So as an SR gets created, the primary client AMS lead will take a look at and triage and be responsible for some of these tickets and moving that into the proper queue. So the next step after that AMS lead takes a look and triages, there's an apps desk, our help desk that will, again, work on and start funneling the SRs to the proper queues and make sure that the appropriate team within Core is taking a look at the issue. And if, in fact, if it's going to span, if a particular SR spans multiple disciplines, then they'll also work on the coordination of coordinating those resources. So from the assignment of the SR to the different stakeholder groups, the experts will be assigned. They'll actually start the process of triaging and diagnosing the issue and putting together a solution. We'll get to SR solution, and now all of our activity is published in our internal systems and can be viewed through our customer portal. And so any AMS customer can log in, take a look at their SR activity with now this is Core's SRs, but take a look at the SR activity, the status of each, what's been worked on, what's been done, and who's done it. All of that information is available via our customer portal. And then obviously as we actually resolve the actual ticket itself, then we'll have a notification sent back to our customers with a final disposition of the activities that have been put in place. And then you'll notice that the bottom bar is just Core Service Account Management. We have account managers that are assigned to every one of our customers that facilitate those weekly meetings, as Marco mentioned, the weekly meetings that we have with our customers to talk about activities. And if you will, it's a mini steering committee for our AMS solution, but making sure that we're constantly in touch with our customers, understanding what's going on, and if there's any adjustments that need to be made along the way, that we have a regular communication cadence to give our customers that vehicle to be able to let us know what adjustments need to be made. So as I mentioned earlier, SLAs are very important. Our service level agreements are very important and drive a lot of our AMS activities. As with, as typical SRs, and as many of you have worked with Oracle SRs, we have 5 different severity levels. I won't read each one of these to you. But we have response time SLAs associated with each one of these severity levels. Response time versus knowing that once a ticket is logged, if a severity 1 ticket is logged, then there will be contact back to our customers within 30 minutes of the actual P1 being logged to make sure that someone within Core is actually dispositioning this ticket and working on the process of getting it assigned to the proper queues. Severity 2s will have a response time within 4 hours. Severity 3s, a response time within 12. Severity 4s within 24 hours. And then P5s typically are nice to have or development type requests, and those can be as scheduled. We'll work with our customers to schedule that work. Marco, any comments about just the severity levels and how those and the response times and how those have worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, a few comments in terms of the severity that's displayed here, and this is basically what we've agreed to, has been working very well. The one thing I think to point out is, it's key to communicate this with your ASM partner. The same token, also communicate this internally to your, whoever's going to be interacting with the ASM partner for various reasons, right? One, understanding so they don't get frustrated when they open something on the P3 and keep checking every 10 minutes on a dashboard to see if it's been resolved. And two, for them not to constantly open up P1s because they want an immediate response, and it's not a high risk, it's not a complete loss of service issue, right? That they need to constantly open the P1s, because what that does is like crying wolf, and it just, I think it hinders the support team's ability to organize themselves and add the value that they could add. Yeah,
that's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, Keith, next slide. So from an AMS perspective, so I know we talked a little bit about it at the very beginning, but from an AMS perspective, so not only is it functional support, but I think one of the things that we found has been very interesting to our customers as we're architecting this solution is we'll also do Chemly development and Chemly support. So Chemly is just so everyone's on the same page, is an acronym that stands for configurations, extensions, modifications, localizations, and integrations. And most of you might be familiar with RISE objects. So these acronyms typically get used interchangeably. But from an AMS perspective, we found that our customers and clients are finding that the fact that not only will we support but develop Chemlys as part of our AMS solution has been pretty compelling. So both from not only just remediating Chemlys, but from a QA testing, break-fix testing, those are all activities that can be included in our AMS offerings. So after a clone or of an environment's been refreshed, if there's particular customizations that need to be tested, remediated along the way during the development process, all of that can be, those are services that we offer as part of our AMS offering. So now this can be, that support can be requested via SR creation, and then and the reason why we do that is just to be able to track ownership, timing, all the way through the communication of the actual issue being resolved. And then in addition to, on the Chemly side, documentation, as Marco mentioned, that we needed to finish up some documentation and provide missing documentation. Those are all services that we can provide as well, because we all know and we realize that having proper documentation for Chemly objects in any development is very key from an ongoing and a long-term support perspective. And then in addition, as we do this development and for any Chemly objects, that we're building an internal knowledge base of documents and activities for our customers and their environments to make sure that we've all worked in environments where there's a small number to only one person who might know exactly how and why a particular Chemly was developed and how it's being supported. Well, we want to make that information more readily available, and so we very much build a knowledge base of our documents and our work. So as we have the assigned resource model, we can make sure that there's no tribal knowledge lost in the hands of a few. Keith, next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Chemly support has actually been one of the most active areas from our AMS offering that our customers are taking advantage of. And I mentioned some of these in the previous slide, but we're doing major and minor enhancements. We're doing a lot of maintenance and break fix, especially around some R12 upgrades. We've been doing a lot of remediation and break fix work around some upgrades. For customers that are capacity constrained, resource constrained via capacity, we've done some completion of the actual Chemly objects for their particular environment. Again, we can do performance analysis and tuning. We've been doing that for a number of customers, especially around R12 upgrades, where specific reports were taking hours to run. We can work on getting those analyzed and tuned down to minutes. We've done that for a few customers who have been very happy with our services around that. So again, that is another active area when it comes to Chemly support and Chemly development. That's an area where we've done quite a bit of work. And then obviously putting together, developing these Chemlys around standards and putting the documentation together, those are all activities that we perform and provide regarding these Chemlys around our AMS solution. Keith, next slide, please. So I'll have Marco help me talk about some of these the myths, some of the AMS myths that we've seen with our customers as we're architecting these solutions and as we've been working with our customers. I think one of the first myths that we've had to overcome and refute as we're architecting some of these solutions is customers typically say that they don't want to lose control of having access to their resources, that outsourcing any functional support or technical support is viewed as losing control of those resources. And so, having the ability, I've heard a number of folks say, I like having the ability of being able to walk down the hall and being able to see and touch my support team. Well, on the surface, that seems like it makes sense, but in most organizations, unless that resource is sitting on the same floor in the same building, most people aren't going to walk down and see their support staff. That support staff is typically remote in one way or another, whether it be in a different building, in a different city, in a different country or continent. That most what we're seeing now is most support resources are remote in some way, shape, or form. And so having Core's AMS solution and implementing Core's AMS solution, while it's third party, is still remote. But the way we remedy that is we're very SLA driven. So not only by our response time SLAs, but in our weekly meetings where we talk about the activity of a specific SR, how we're making progress, we are very driven by the SLAs of getting our tickets completed and resolved as quickly as possible and keeping track of those. So there's a dashboard of our activities and how we're doing against each one of those SRs. And again, and as Marco mentioned as well, our staff is very experienced in multiple environments. While every environment is unique, specific issues can pop up that are similar across multiple environments. And again, with those performance SLAs, we feel and we've seen that our resources can typically resolve issues more quickly than client staff that has only been involved in one environment or has knowledge of one environment. Marco, can you add anything else to this myth and how that worked at GFI?
Sure. Just two quick things, and I hate being brutally honest, but just being able to reach out and touch an employee doesn't mean that it can add value in the sense that they're going to resolve every issue that you're going to encounter quickly or in a timely fashion. So I think in this day and age, it doesn't matter where the resources sit as long as you can, they are available and they know what to do, right? That's the most important thing, right? The two keys are you have available resources, and two, they know what to do, and they can correct it or address the issue that you're having. The other thing is, the woes of having internal employees aren't just, that they're here and they're, I can see them, they're in our building, et cetera. You got to talk about the long-term risks, right? In a transition that an employee, resigns, the turnover or the turnaround time to replace that resource is not a day, an hour, a week. Sometimes it can turn into 3 months, and it's a gamble because the person that you're going to be hiring could potentially not work out, right? In the AMS model, it's different, right? Core, just using them as an example, has a pool of resources, right? One resource for some reason or another is unavailable, moves on to another client, a company, or you just don't have a good experience. The transition to a different resource is much, much quicker, right? Which gives you lower risk. So I just want to point that out as well, that it's not just about a resource being assigned. It's about how resourcing is structured in the AMS model compared to internally staffed.
Perfect. Thanks, Marco. Keith, next slide. We'll move on to myth number 2 that we've heard from a number of our customers, that the lowest cost solution or lower cost solution is the best solution. And we consider that a myth, just because as we've been architecting some of these solutions, we found that taking advantage of our global resources and our global model actually gives us more capabilities of being able to take advantage of labor arbitrage, meaning that we can move the work and the SR to the lowest cost center to be able to take advantage of not only just the lowest cost resource, or the lowest price resource, but the resources that are going to lead us to the lowest cost to resolve the issue. So sometimes, we have offshore resources that are very capable, but sometimes we find that leveraging our nearshore resources, which take advantage of time zones, language, culture, and that's, as I mentioned earlier, that was one of the reasons we were very excited to add Buenos Aires to our list of offices and capabilities, is we found that leveraging nearshore resources give us the ability to resolve SRs more quickly that lead to the lowest cost to resolving an issue, as opposed to just having the lowest price or the lowest cost resources. So I think, again, we believe in taking advantage of labor arbitrage and moving the work to the lowest cost center area that can still resolve the issue, but do it in the most timely fashion that leads to the lowest overall cost.
And just to add to that, sorry.
No, please go ahead, Marco.
When we were going through our interview process for who our strategic partner was going to be for AMS for OBIE, we had prices or estimates varying, right, from low to high to medium. And the one thing that I personally learned, and GFI has learned over the years, is you get what you pay for. So, just keep that in mind. If you're looking for the lower cost, and, it's just my personal opinion, you're setting yourself up for failure. Yeah. Because, it's just, you get what you pay for. So I just wanted to point that out.
Perfect. Thanks, Marco. I think, and then lastly, just myth number 3, one of the things that we hear is, I don't want to outsource my support to an AMS provider because my environment is so unique. There's no way that anyone could ever really understand and be able to support me long term. And time after time and over again, we find that not to be true. At the end of the day, while there are some customizations that are bigger and more complex than others, the support that's needed and the skill sets that are needed are ultimately roughly the same and can be more standardized. And so the way we've mitigated any real unique or complex environments is by having that structured onboarding, where we have that transition period where we gather the documentation, that we understand the business processes and the transactions that are in place. We spend some time with shadowing resources to make sure that we understand if the situation calls for it, that we understand exactly the nuances with the customization or the uniqueness, that we build the knowledge base so we can make sure that no tribal knowledge is lost, that any unique or specific information around that customization or the environment is gathered, that we build our knowledge base, and so that our group of resources, our global resources, understand what's going on. Again, with the unique environments, and we have an assigned staffing model, so it's not completely a pool of resources, but we have assigned resources that, as they're assigned to specific accounts, get to know the environment, and over time, we'll get to know the environment very intimately and understand what's going on that can help our resources, our AMS resources, to be able to troubleshoot an issue more quickly because we understand that uniqueness. And again, from an AMS perspective, we can provide focused support. And so from a scalable and a sustainability perspective, as Marco mentioned very early on, whether from a core perspective, we have scalable resources. We have over 100 resources, or a couple hundred resources that are available to be able to provide support from an organization perspective that, from a long-term perspective, can ultimately be brought to bear to be able to support any environment. Marco, anything you want to add there?
I think you've covered everything except for one thing. If, regardless of AMS and regardless of Core Services or other vendors, if you're living behind this myth, and that's one of the reasons why you haven't looked into a better support structure for your technology, you need to do that immediately. Because what happens is you're at a higher risk if you constantly or repeatedly have shut down, right, eyes looking at your technology because you think you're unique. You're actually making yourself more unique than you actually are by doing that. The other thing is, it's a myth because, as I said earlier, there's no way, right, that a company that as a business model supports 100+ clients that have completely different configurations, right, can come into your environment and say, well, this one's different than that 100+ clients that we've, that at a day-to-day basis, our business is to maintain, develop, and support them, right? Just think of it from that perspective, and just makes this myth just absurd.
Perfect. All right, Keith, next slide. So, Marco, I'll turn this back over to you. I think that, to summarize, please.
Yeah, you were just doing such a great job, though, Bijou. So, the recipe for Oracle AMS success, I mean, determining the right structure for your organization is key, and just emphasizing what we said earlier is it's not one size fits all. It's up to what efficiencies, what values, what risks you want to address, in dealing with the strategic partner you choose, what portions or what roles that you want to play versus that they want to play, etc. Right? Skill sets, it's basically identifying, if you were to hire these people internally, what would you be looking for, right? And it's not just today or tomorrow, it's long term. Where's your strategic roadmap, and what skill sets do you need to support that strategic roadmap? And, it's a partnership, right? So you need to work with, the company or your ASM provider just to make sure that you're seeing eye to eye. And it's not going to be, everything that we discussed today is how it's going to be throughout the relationship. It's going to change, but communication is key, right? Making sure everybody knows what's happening, what needs to change, what's going on, etc. Yeah, and participation. It's only as good as both sides participating and trying to make it, the best support structure or relationship that's possible. Yeah. Bijou, anything to add?
No, I think that's perfect. And Marco, I think the last one kind of nailed it, is just actively participate. I think we talked about all of these, but active participation and making sure the structure and the organization and the mechanics are working is key for everyone.
Excellent.
I agree.
Excellent. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have a couple questions coming in, but before that, we want to ask, ask you a question, are you ready to follow the recipe for Oracle AMS success? If you are, then respond to the poll question and request a one-on-one chat about your Oracle AMS needs with one of our experts, Biju, or one of his team members, and we'll be happy to get that set up today. So let me go ahead and pull up that poll question while we are waiting on your questions to come in. Uh-oh, hold on a second. Give me just a second. Okay. No. Let's try this again. There we go.
I can see the poll question now, Keith.
Excellent.
Do we get any questions submitted?
Yes, yes. Well, first question I'm going to go ahead and answer that a couple of you had. Yes, you will get a recording of this presentation. Tomorrow, about 24 hours after the presentation, we'll be getting a question. You're getting an automated email that will allow you to go ahead and download both a copy of the PowerPoint and review a recording of the presentation. So that's the first question. Let me go to first question we have in. First question we have in is from Steve. Steve wants to know, does Core Services provide both functional and Chemly support in their AMS offering? Because I know we talked about a lot of that Chemly, but you didn't talk a lot about that functional support. Biju, can you clarify that for us?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Keith. I'll take that. Yeah, so yes, from a functional perspective and the Chemly development, absolutely. So again, very situational specific when it comes to functional support, when it comes to Oracle modules, all the Oracle modules. We can provide functional support, training support, business process support, in addition to the technical side as well. So great question, and yeah, I'm glad that we were able to clarify that. Yes, it is very much both from a functional, technical, training, and business process. We can provide all of that.
Excellent, excellent. So my next question is, can Core provide Oracle AMS support on a 24/7 basis? I don't think you guys touched on that either.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We very much can, 24/7, 365, and that's with our offices in India. We've got 3 offices in India. We have resources in Buenos Aires, and then obviously in the States as well. We do very much have a 24/7 model where we can, again, not only source tickets and SRs to the lowest cost, but from a support coverage perspective, we can make sure that our global offices are able to address tickets ASAP 24/7, 365.
Okay. What do you recommend? I have another question here in Biju. What do you recommend for a client who, we're talking about Chemlys, who is working on, one of the older versions of Oracle, perhaps 11.5.10, and does have a lot of those unique customizations? Mm-hmm. How do you typically deal with clients who have those kind of issues who come to you, in terms of the uniqueness of their environments and such?
Yeah, well, so our resources are very experienced, so we do still have some customers that are running 11i, 11.5.9. We've got a customer running 11.5.9, got a few running 11.5.10. And so again, our resources are very familiar. We've done quite a few. We've done over a few hundred Oracle R12 upgrades, and so we've remediated a lot of Chemly objects as it goes from 11i to 12. And so again, we can help not only assess and remediate those chemicals in release 11 and 12, but we have the ability to remediate and put together the documentation that could help the customer support those release 11 objects.
Excellent. And we have a final question here from Jeff, and perhaps both Biju, you and Marco can speak to this. What would you typically think or say is your typical time cycle for the due diligence process for finding, identifying, and selecting a potential AMS provider?
Yeah, you know what, Marco, I'll let you take that one. I think it's relevant information for you.
Sure. I think it all depends. In other words, there's various answers to that question because it depends on your requirements and your needs, right? If you don't have any support currently internally, then you can ramp that up. I think it needs to take at least 1 to 3 months, depending on your footprint and your landscape. But more than that, I think the information and your analysis becomes too stale to make the proper decision.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, well, we are done with all the questions, and we're about out of time. I want to thank all of you for joining us, and I want to thank you, Biju, for your time, and the biggest thanks goes out to you, Marco. We want to thank you for your time here today.
Not
a problem. Marco, thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks
Talk
everyone.
to you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.